Is that research can't be used to link acetaminophen to autism and ADHD. This comes after 440 lawsuits were brought against the makers of Tylenol and generic acetaminophen for causing potentially the neurodevelopmental disorders. Kristen Allen is live at the First Floor Safety Desk this morning. And Kristen, what is new with this case?
Emerson, Johnson & Johnson, the makers of Tylenol, will keep moving to dismiss these lawsuits, saying this is a potential for long-term public health consequences in using what it describes as scientific guesswork in courtrooms, and that medical professionals know best whether acetaminophen is appropriate to use based on patients' medical conditions. The lawsuits were filed after a 2021 consensus statement published in Nature Review's Endocrinology that called for more warnings around taking these drugs during pregnancy. Families with children with autism and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, argue drug manufacturers should have issued warnings to pregnant women about the risks. A U.S. district judge wrote that, in her opinion, at least one of the experts provided by plaintiffs in the case, quote, cherry-picked and misrepresented study results and refused to acknowledge the role of genetics in both autism and ADHD. The ruling is largely consistent with the position of major medical journals, which say evidence is not sufficient enough to make a cause and effect link between the use of acetaminophen during pregnancy and autism and ADHD. There is some evidence to suggest that acetaminophen use during pregnancy may be linked with some neurobehavioral issues. A definitive cause, though, in effect, has not been established, and the risks may be greater with higher and more frequent doses. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists maintain that acetaminophen is safe in moderation during pregnancy. Coming up in our next half hour, with just days left to go until Christmas, we'll tell you how to keep your packages safe from porch pirates. Emerson?
Kristen, thank you.